Thank you for joining us for the very first EurekAlert workshop for public information officers, which is going to be held in Africa. We're very excited about this. We're also excited to have people joining us from across Africa. I know we've got people from Kenya, Nigeria, Uganda, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. If I've left out any countries, please let me know in the chat. We're going to start with an introduction to EurekAlert, who is sponsoring this workshop today. We're very grateful for that. Not all of you may know about EurekAlert and their services, so I'm going to actually hand over to Ashley Fon to explain it. After that, we are going to get into some practical tips on science communication. We're going to be looking at storytelling, how to find the stories, how to find the news angles, how to work with the media. And we're going to workshop some practical examples along the way. But first, I'd like to introduce you to Ashley Fon, who's the Membership and Marketing Manager for EurekAlert. EurekAlert is part of the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences. So welcome, Ashley.
Thank you. So like she just said, my name's Ashley Fon. I'm the Membership and Marketing Manager at EurekAlert. I'm so thrilled you could join us for our very first Africa-focused SciComm webinar. As many of you may be aware, EurekAlert is a mission-driven unit of the nonprofit, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. We're dedicated to making science news more accessible to journalists and the public, and to ultimately helping people incorporate science when making informed decisions. Our mission is rooted in the belief that science should be easily understood and widely accessible, as many of you are already doing with science news from your organization. We recognize that great science is being conducted across the globe, but some of this vital work isn't being represented on EurekAlert. More than half of our content currently comes from the US and Europe, and less than 1% of our news releases in 2023 were from Africa. That's why we invest in this webinar, to equip public information officers like you with the tools and confidence to share groundbreaking news from Africa with the world. To further highlight news from Africa, we recently launched an Africa news portal that aggregates all news releases from the continent. The portal is prominently displayed on our homepage and accessible at eurekalert.org/Africa. If you're already using EurekAlert, we're thrilled to have your support. If not, we'd love to welcome your news to our platform. We're offering participants of today's webinar 5 free submission credits to use on EurekAlert. You can distribute news releases about peer-reviewed studies or post feature stories about your scientist. If you'd like to take advantage of this, please reach out to me. I'll share my contact information in the chat shortly. Thank you for your commitment to science communication. We look forward to getting to know you better.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you, EurekAlert. We'll definitely take you up on that, and I think we'll talk about that again at the end. Just remind you that there is this offer. So just to introduce myself, I'm Gillian Jones. I'm from Story Studio Communications. I have about over 25 years of journalism and communication experience. I've spent a lot of time in newsrooms, and then I went into corporate communications. I really have specialized in sort of more taking technical stuff and making it simple. So a lot of financial journalism and communication, and technical communication and legal. So that's sort of been my speciality, is working in the more technical stuff and turning it into really compelling stories. And today I'm going to be sharing some tips for you on how to do this with science. My co-host on this webinar is Skulk Mouton, and I will hand over to Skulk to introduce himself. Skulk, your sound is not on.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Skulk Mouton. I'm also a member of Story Studio Communications, and I am currently also a communication officer at Wits University, which is one of the leading research intensive universities on the continent. My specialization is doing science communication and taking research and making it and publicizing it and making it accessible to the public. Before joining Wits, I was also actually born in a newsroom, and I spent 14 years there, including about 7 years as news editor of 2 leading newspapers in South Africa, national newspapers. So very much coming from a journalist background, and then also just at the moment being fascinated by science and sharing the stories that we are privileged to do.
Thank you, Skulk, and thank you for the introductions. Let's now get on to the importance of communication. Why does communication matter? Many of you may be working with scientists who don't really see the value in communication. They don't want to be communicating. I'm hoping the fact that you're in this workshop today means that you disagree and you do see the value of communication, because it is important, and it's important that scientists communicate their research for many reasons. I mean, one of them is that their research is often publicly funded, so that it should actually, then their findings should reach the broader public. It benefits society. Most research would benefit society, which means society should actually hear about it, find out how it contributes to their progress, their well-being. And, you know, we do know people are not reading academic journals, so it doesn't help to simply share the science in an academic journal. You really want it to reach the broader public. It's important because it can influence policy decisions. It can inspire future scientists. It can enhance your institution's reputation. For a lot of you who work in institutions, your research is actually marketing material if you communicate it properly, and that's important. Another very important reason to communicate your scientific research is that it builds trust. And I mean, building trust with the public is hugely important, especially we're in this age of science denialism. And we really, to counteract that, you want to be building trust by communicating. As an example, during COVID, South Africa scientists actually played a very important role in sort of breaking down the miscommunication and getting people to trust in the science. And they did that even at a global level, and that's really important. And another point is to combat misinformation. We're living in this era of fake news and misinformation, and it's scary. And I think if we can communicate the science in a very accessible way to the general public, we can try and help overcome a lot of that misinformation. But one thing that we are dealing with is that we're now in this world of artificial intelligence, which actually just complicates the whole misinformation scenario that we find ourselves in. So I'm actually going to show you 2 videos to illustrate this complex world that communicators find themselves in of AI. And thank you to Daniel Bourne from 4 Paws, who actually shared this with us. He should be in the audience. I don't know if he's joined in yet, but thanks, Daniel. Let's take a look at these two videos, and you'll see. Okay, second video.
Hey there, animal lovers. Get ready to smile from ear to ear. After 40 long years, Charlie the elephant is finally free. Captured from Zimbabwe's Hwange National Park back in '84 when he was just a baby, Charlie's journey has been tough. From performing tricks in the Boswell Wilkie Circus to being cooped up in South Africa's National Zoo, Charlie has seen it all. But thanks to the tireless efforts of animal welfare groups, his story takes a turn for the better. Folks at the EMS Foundation worked their tails off and announced on Tuesday that Charlie made a nail-biting 4-hour trip to freedom. Now, he's stretching his legs and enjoying life at his new home in the Shambhala Private Reserve in Limpopo Province. It's a big ol' sigh of relief knowing this gentle giant can now roam free, just as nature intended. Here's to Charlie, and to all the heroes who made his freedom possible. Stay wild, y'all.
Can anyone spot the difference between the two videos? Anyone like to come in here and tell me what the difference is? Daniel, you can also speak. I see you are on the call. Everyone's very quiet.
I see there's a hand up.
Okay.
Okay, first of all, they didn't only use an African elephant, they had Indian elephants and yeah, photos that were probably not Charlie and so on. So a bit of a mix and muddle on the second one. First one looked authentic to me.
Absolutely. So the first one was authentic. That was the genuine four paws video. The second one was an AI generated one. And yeah, it doesn't show Charlie. It makes up facts. It's not a part of it's not even true. So this is scary. And Daniel will tell you there were actually a number of these AI videos produced about Charlie the elephant. And I think this is something we have to deal with. And we don't have the answers. I can't tell you what to do, but I think we're still trying to grapple with AI. It's very new to all of us. But one thing that I do think we can do is just make sure that we're telling our own credible stories, and our institution's own credible stories, and that we're sharing them via our own channels, and that we're sharing them via the media, which we do still think is a credible way to share them, and we'll discuss that later. But yes, it's interesting to see that this is what we're facing. But how do you share your own stories? That's what we're going to move on and tackle. And you really start with the most crucial.
Hey there, Anna.
Sorry, the most crucial thing, which is storytelling. We have to tell stories. As communicators, as science communicators, we have to find the stories in the science and we have to tell them. So just to get you into storytelling mode, I'd like all of you to close your eyes wherever you may be. Just close your eyes and imagine you're walking down a nearby street. It's not too busy. There's a low hum of a few cars. And then there's a slight breeze that flutters across your face. And it brings with it the rich, comforting smell of freshly baked bread. The scent is warm and inviting. You can actually imagine cutting into its warm, crisp crust, smearing it in butter, which melts into the pillowy texture of the bread. Anybody feeling hungry after that description or nostalgic? Hands up. Any thumbs up? Okay, there's some laughter. Okay, there's some thumbs up. Yes, exactly. If you're feeling a little bit hungry now and you're craving a slice of bread and it's thickly smeared with butter, it's because of the power of storytelling, because storytelling really, it creates an emotional connection with you by pulling on your five senses. But some of you may be thinking, okay, that's great, storytelling's great, but it's really for kids, it's for fairy tales. Like, I need to, as I'm working in science, I need to be communicating cold, hard facts. I need to be communicating data. I can't be telling fairy tales. That's ridiculous. But let me reassure you, we're going to turn to the science to show you why storytelling is actually a scientific thing. And actually for over 27,000 years since the first cave paintings were drawn, we've actually been telling stories to communicate. It's one of our most fundamental ways of communicating. And we actually have been wired to communicate via stories. So our brains actually are activated by stories. No matter whether you are a banker or a filmmaker or a scientist, your brain is activated by stories, not by dry, cold facts. So if you're just listening to a PowerPoint presentation and it's just got a couple of bullet points or lots of bullet points and data and technical terms, it really just activates a very small part of your brain, just the one sort of involved in language processing. The rest of your brain is idle. But when you actually hear a story or read a story, it activates so much more of your brain. The whole brain lights up, which they can see when they actually do scans of the brain. And you can get your language, your sensory, your motor, your memory regions, all of these light up when you hear a story. It creates that emotional connection that's just more sticky across your brain. And that's why you want to use stories and not just dry facts when communicating. That emotional engagement that you use through, you can do things like if you heighten tension, it releases cortisol, which, you know, that creates more of an emotional connection. If you create some sort of positive, warm, fuzzy feeling, that may release dopamine, which also creates more of a stronger emotional attachment. All of these help people just engage with your story and just connect to what you're trying to tell them. So that's a bit of a speed dating session through the brain, but we'll actually share some resources on the science behind the brain and storytelling. But what you do need to know is that the brain lights up when you have memorable messages and stories. So that's all very well, but how do you actually tell stories? That's what you may be wondering. And there are many techniques that you can use for storytelling. Oopsie, two slides. So there's many things that you can use. There's things like anecdotes, which are really just short, amusing, interesting stories that you can tell about a real incident or a person. There are analogies, which are similar, also just little stories that you can tell to make a point. Case studies, you can use case studies to bring something to life. You can use metaphors, which is where you're painting pictures with words, like a metaphor. It's basically comparing two unrelated things, like heart of gold. Your heart is not really gold, but you use that as a descriptor. Repetition often works very well. People often think that they've communicated something once and that's it. People remember it, but no, people remember things through repetition. Show, don't tell. So that's basically using descriptive language to show someone something. So you could, for example, say the sparkling diamond, or which is a tell. But to show it, you could say the light in the diamond flickered so brightly that it hurt my eyes. And that's more showing that the diamond is sparkling as opposed to telling. Conflict. So conflict is, if you go back and look at every single fairy tale that we were told as children, there's always conflict. There's always, your hero has to overcome some sort of conflict, some sort of difficulty. And then once they've done that, you get your happy ending. So conflict is an important part of creating that storytelling, that emotion. Humor is another one that you can use. And plain, accessible language. We'll talk more about that in the next slide. So you really, I know you're writing about scientific topics, you're communicating about scientific topics, but you want to do it in a very easy to understand, accessible way. So you want to avoid jargon, you want to avoid acronyms. Where you're going to use sort of technical terms, make sure that you have explained them immediately after you've used the technical term, explain it. But really try and write in absolute everyday language. Try and, if you're making videos, etc., just make sure that you're speaking to people in plain language. Sometimes scientists and other technical people, I know financial people, they're scared to talk in plain language because they think it actually makes them look like they're not that clever, and they want to show that they're clever. But actually, again, there's more research on the brain that shows people think you're clever, they think you're more intelligent when you do speak in a way that they understand. Because if you can speak in plain language, it means that you really understand your subject too. Sometimes people resort to technical terms when they don't fully understand it. So you really want to just make sure that you're using the power of plain language to get your message across. So bearing in mind all these elements that I've sort of gone through with you, the analogies, metaphors, etc. We're going to turn now to an absolute master storyteller to look at how he does it. And that he's a scientist, and he's a scientist who can take the science and tell it in plain everyday language without looking like he doesn't understand his own science. And that's Professor Lee Berger. So I want you to watch the video. I'm going to show you just an extract of it. And I want you to identify the elements that we've spoken about. I want you to look for things like the anecdotes, the plain language, all the storytelling elements. See if you can identify them. And then afterwards, if you can all share what you saw, either via the chat or put up your hands and speak. But let me... I just want to start it at... okay.
These discoveries began in a situation that I found myself in back in the 1990s, a situation where exploration appeared to have been finished in the field of paleoanthropology, in the search for human origins. I found my own university closing my exploration program. I found myself in a situation of assisting in a job search to find a new director to push the paleoanthropology, the human origin study, in a new direction, towards technology, towards the application of using modern technology to study existing fossils, not to find new ones. That young man that was going to take over my directorship position and lead us in the new direction was killed in a motorcycle accident in London. But we'd already invested in that direction. We had postdoctoral students, computers, everything. And one of them, a young Kenyan named Job Kibbe, came into my office and said, would I be his postdoctoral supervisor now with this tragedy? And I said, no, because I can't be. You're a lab guy, I'm a field guy, but I've just found this site that's bugging me. So if you want to learn to be a field guy, let's go out to the site and see what it has to offer. August 15th, 2008. Job, myself, my dog Tal, my then 9-year-old son Matthew walked up to the site. I got to the edge of it, we were looking around, and I said, go find fossils. And with that, off Matthew and Tal went. And I was talking to Job, and I said, you know, I don't know why they left this little hole. Miners had actually found this and put a couple of blasts into it, but then they left it. And as I finished saying that, Matthew, who's now 15 yards off the site, in the middle of grass, says, Dad, I found a fossil. I almost didn't go and look. But he's my 9-year-old son, and I, like all of you, you want to encourage fossil hunting. So I started walking towards him, and this is what I saw. And 5 meters away, I knew his and my life were going to change forever. Because sticking out of the side of that rock, I saw a hominid clavicle. Matthew says I cursed. I don't remember that. And I turned the rock over, and there, sticking out of the back of it, was a jaw and a tooth. And that would lead to an extraordinary time. Matthew had found a skeleton, one of the rarest things you can ever find. That skeleton would be part of this skull. We would eventually find another one, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one. We would call that little site Malapa, and it would, for a moment in history, be one of, if not the richest early hominid site on the continent of Africa. Skeletons in remarkable, pristine condition, with organic material. I threw myself into this. This was a paleoanthropological equivalent of winning the lottery. We don't find these things. Over the years following that, 2011, 2012, 2013, we would have the time of our scientific lives. It's something like 15 papers in the journal Science. more in the journal Nature, dozens of peer-reviewed articles. It was living a scientific dream. It was our version of a scientific lottery, all from a little site that looks like that, a hole in the ground. And I realized that.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. Anyone like to comment on some of the storytelling elements that you saw? Marian?
I can comment on a few, just tell me when to stop. There was an anecdote that about the guy who they were going to get in as a director of being killed in a motorcycle accident. Then this chap Job, who'd come and said, would he be his supervisor? And he said, one of them was a techie and one was a lab guy. And then he goes on with the story of him walking in this place and his son's discovery of his son and the dog going ahead, and then the son finding this thing and how he could see from a distance there was, a jawbone and a whatever, and how they reckon, for him it was like winning the lottery. I think I'll stop there. That's all I made notes on.
Okay, great. Beth?
Beth, I think you're muted.
I did actually ask in the Q&A, which might be easier. But my concern is that he is an amazing storyteller, and I've seen him and I've looked at some of his writing as well, but his theories were also kind of massively disputed and he had to fight that. So I'm just wondering how we reconcile this with like the other things. I mean, unless that's just not like moot, unless that doesn't matter.
Well, I think what we're trying to look at here is how he tells the stories, whether his findings, I think that's for the scientists to debate. But I think the storytelling, whether it's correct or not, I think that's what we're trying to focus on right now. I don't want to get into debates about. I mean, he is controversial, Lee Berger, but I think as a storyteller, he is amazing.
Yeah, I think if I can come in there, that's a great point to raise, Beth. And I actually wanted to come in. It leads me into a point that I was going to make. Lee Berger is a controversial character. He, especially among the science community, and he is controversial because he uses stories. Not because of his science. A lot of his stories are almost seem fantastical, like the burial in the cave. So many of you on the call might know or might not know, Lee Berger discovered Homo naledi in a cave site. And then he called for various scientists to come and join him to excavate, and he came up with this hypothesis that Homo naledi, the species, buried their dead in a cave, which asks the question, were they human? Because we always thought that we are the only species that care for our dead by burying them. So the controversy is there. But I think what is important here to recognize is how Lee uses his stories to fascinate people and to make people make people interested in science. He's not saying this is fact, but he's putting it out there, and it's a hypothesis. It's not, and it's a theory. So people can still come and prove him wrong. The science is out there. The scientists can do their work, but the storytelling, I think, is the important part. Many scientists are very, very scared of dumbing down their research, of telling a story and thinking, okay, I'm dumbing down my research. It's not dumbing down your research. It's translating your research into a language that me as a journalist, or me as someone watching a television story can be interested in. And I think that is also a point that we can really bring across to our scientists when we want to get them to tell their stories. Not saying they need to come up with fantastical hypotheses. That's not our job. But to find the story in the science that they are doing, and we'll touch on that a bit later again. Is there any questions or comments on that? Sorry, Gillian.
Now, I just wanted to get back to the storytelling elements before we forget what he said. Any other storytelling elements that you picked up in Lee Berger? I hope there's more of you out there paying attention, but I'll just highlight some. He used plain, very, very plain, accessible language. You know, he said, like, you're the lab guy, I'm the field guy. Things like that. He spoke about the jaw. He didn't say mandibles. He spoke about teeth and skeletons. He didn't go into the scientific terms for those. And he used repetition. He said, and we found a skeleton, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one. So he wasn't scared to use repetition. Metaphors. It was like winning the paleontology lottery. He used show, don't tell. He could have just said, you know, in the 1990s, my team and I found this hominid or whatever it was they found. But instead, he does this whole show, how the story evolved. He tells you, you know, how they went out, his son, his dog, they all went out and they went and found hominids or skeletons. Sorry, I might have the wrong, the wrong species. But those are all storytelling elements that he uses. And so I think it's worth going to have a look at this whole video just to see how he tells stories and how you could use some of those yourself when you're telling stories.
There's a hand up from Corin.
Yes, Corin.
Hi. So I just wanted to talk about the show Don't Tell, where he also adds images that we can be able to relate to what we found. We might not have been able to do that if he was just talking, but he showed us. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I think he does show don't tell very, very well, because, you know, another scientist might just have put this across as just something very dry, maybe a table, but he really does tell the story and take us along. I think it's very memorable. Anyone else have any comments here? Okay, so when you're telling stories, the absolutely first thing that you should be asking yourself or whoever wants you to communicate for them is, who is the audience? You actually can't really go ahead until you know who the audience is. You have to understand who your audience is and then what matters to them, because your communication really has to be something that the audience cares about. And the only way you can make sure it's something that the audience cares about is if you understand who they are. So having your audience top of mind is critical. So if someone comes to you and asks you to communicate for them, a scientist, someone in your institution, your first question is, who do you see as the audience? Make sure you are writing for the audience or communicating for the audience. You're not communicating for what the institution wants to say. You're making sure your message is what the audience wants to hear. Very critical point. The next critical point is the so what. So when you are sort of crafting your message, there's got to be that so what in it. you've got to be able to say, you've got to be able to explain what it means to the audience. So what, if you've worked in newsrooms, I know there's a number of journalists on the call, you may have heard the so what many, many times. Because if you go and pitch a story to your news editor, and the first thing they're going to go, well, what's the so what in it? Which means, what's the value in the story to the audience? And if you can't answer that, then maybe you don't yet have a good story and you need to go and do a little bit more work on it. And you should also be able to answer that in sort of one sentence. It shouldn't take you a detailed explanation to answer the so what. The so what should be something that you can just very, very quickly say. So to give you an example, so if you say the SKA has found a new galaxy, you might think that that's your news, but actually there's no so what in that. So if there's a new galaxy that's been found, the so what could be, well, this could offer an alternative to Earth for humans to live on. There may be potential human life there. That would be a so what. So just having a new discovery is meaningless unless you can add the so what. What does this new discovery mean for your audience? So I'm going to hand over to Skulk now, who's going to pick up on the news versus science.
So when we are speaking about news in this webinar, we are really speaking about content, whether the content is going to a newspaper, whether it's going to your social media channels, wherever it's going. We are competing very, very strongly with thousands of other channels there. I mean, you all know how social media and all the other channels compete with your own attention. So what is important is that we need to break through all these masses of content and grab people's attention. Whether it's you, whether it's a news editor, whether it's a funder, whether it's some potential students, we want to be able to reach them, and we want to be able to reach them immediately. And the way that we need to do that is to tell them what the story is in an immediate manner. So if you pick up a phone, for instance, and you call a family member and you say, oh, I just heard a story from X, Y, and Z, and this is what they said. This is what they said would be your story. So in a news story, for instance, you see the upside down pyramid there on the right. The most newsworthy information would go right at the top. If you send an email to a news editor in a newsroom, they get 300 emails in the morning before 9. They want to see what the story is in the subject line and not read through a whole media release to see, okay, there is somewhere here a story. I'm not sure really what it is, but I think there might be something. Let's put a journalist on that to go and see what it is. No, you want to tell that person, this is a story, this is why it's important. So the difference in news and science, Jillian, if we can go to the next one. The difference in news and science is completely the opposite. In science, scientists would usually, in writing a journal article, they would start with an idea, and then they would go to their methodology, and then they will unpack the methodology. Then they would come to their findings, and then eventually they would write a conclusion. News is the direct opposite. news, you want to say what the story is before you come to the less important information, like I'm saying less important, what scientists would see as more important, the methodology and that type of thing. So when I go to a journal article, the place where I would get the news is I would go straight to the bottom, read the conclusion, see, okay, this is what they found. This is what they concluded. And there I would usually find my news angle. So in news, the reason news is structured like an upside down pyramid is way back when newspapers were, can't even say printed on paper anymore. But when newspapers were printed on paper, you would actually get the paper would be laid out, and you would get a 5 centimeter column for your story, and there would be strips of paper that the subs would actually type out, and they would literally tear off the rest that doesn't fit into that 5 centimeters. So whatever you write after that 5 centimeters would be lost. So that's where it comes from. And then also when they send stories by wires, you never know when that wire connection is going to be lost. So your critical information comes at the front. And even today in digital news, you only read probably the first 3 paragraphs of the news, and then you lose interest. So that is why it's, and we are programmed that way through 100 years of journalism. We are programmed that way, that this is how it works. So you're not going to read through a whole journal article to find out what the news is at the bottom. You just don't have the time for it. So critically, first to capture people's imagination, and then to keep that imagination going, we need to be very, very, very clear about what our story is. We can go to the next slide. So in finding a story, I got a call from Professor Lou Ashwell. He's a very good geologist. He used to work for NASA. He's working at Wits School of Geosciences at the moment. And he called me and he said that he published the story. The journal paper is on the left there. Archean zircons Miocene oceanic hotspot rocks establish ancient, I can't even read this, continental crust beneath Mauritius. He gave me that. And his words were, I want you to make me as famous as Lee Berger. And I didn't know how. So going back to what I just said before, when I want to find the news angle in a science paper, I go to the conclusion. Even better is going to this dude's office and say, tell me your story. And this is what happened. Gillian?
Is a slamming screen door, sneaking out late, tapping on your window when you're on the phone and you talk real slow and it's late and your mama don't know. There's 2 kinds of places on the earth. There are continents which stand high because they're made out of light materials like granite. And then there are the oceans, which sit low in basins because they're made out of rocks that are more dense, like basalt. Now, the continents contain a bunch of rocks that ranges in age enormously, from the oldest rocks in the Earth, which are almost 4,000 million years old, that's 4 billion, to younger rocks. But the ocean basins contain almost entirely young rocks. The old sitting high continents are spreading apart from each other because in the oceans, new rocks are made at mid-oceanic ridge spreading centers. Now, another thing you can see from the map is that the continents seem to be able to be joined together. And so Africa was once connected to North and South America, and Africa was also connected to India. So at about 200 million years ago, they began to break apart. We have been trying to understand the details of the breakup history of this part of the world, including these continental pieces. When did the ocean form, and how did the continents break apart? The island of Mauritius contains very young volcanic rocks. The oldest is about 9 million years old. And there are younger ones on Mauritius, but there's no rock on Mauritius that's older than about 9 million years. So in order to study the geological past, what becomes important to us is determining the ages of rocks. When did they form? The best way to do this is using radioactive isotope systems. The best isotopic system to do this involves the mineral zircon. And zircon is a special mineral because it likes to crystallize and incorporate uranium, which is radioactive, and it decays into lead. And we can measure these two isotopes very precisely. What we found in Mauritius by studying the volcanic rocks there were zircons that are extremely old. And this is a very surprising result because they really shouldn't be there. So there are a few grains within the trachyte that show ages of between 2,500 and 3,000 million years. So that's 2.5 to 3 billion years. Old materials, as old as 2.5 to 3 billion years, shouldn't occur in the oceans. When Africa and India began to spread apart, they leave pieces behind, one of which was later blanketed by volcanoes at about 6 to 7 million years ago, and it's invisible. So in that sense, it's a lost continent. It's not Atlantis, but there's a small fragment of continent that we can detect using the zircon ages that must lie under Mauritius. Long as a slamming screen door, sneaking out late, tapping on your window, when you're on the phone and you talk real slow, and it's late and your mama don't know.
So that story from the journal paper title, Archean Zircons in Miocene Oceanic Hotspots. Nobody would ever have read that. The video in the early days of YouTube and sharing social media on YouTube, sharing videos on YouTube, got over 700,000 views. The story was used in National Geographic. It was used in the New York Times and all over the world. And just by going to speak to a scientist and hearing the story and being fascinated, and I think that's the key thing. So if you don't actually understand, just go and speak to the people. The story will come out, and be sensitive to a possible story in there. Lou Ashwell, when I walked into his office, it's chaos. You don't have a place to sit. There's just rocks all over the place. There's papers all over the place. As you see, he's a character. And that character we also brought out in the story, I think, by him singing the Taylor Swift song. So yeah, don't be scared to tell a story. and veer off a bit from the strict science. Gillian?
Long is Islam and scripture.
Thanks. So we'd now like you to quickly complete a poll. We're interested to hear whether you think media still matters. We're living in an age where we have our own media channels, our own social media, we have our own YouTube channels. We can tell our own stories directly to audiences. So we just would like you to answer this poll and tell us if you think traditional media still matters. And just to clarify, when we're talking about traditional media, we're also talking about traditional media's online presence, which is where probably a lot of you consume media. So if you could quickly complete the poll, and then let's see what you think. Ashley, can you see the results of the poll? Are you able to share that?
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay.
People are still answering. We're about 65% in. So about 67% of the participants have completed the poll, but looks like it's still rolling in.
Okay, let's just wait. Okay, we'll give you another 30 seconds to finish, please. Ashley, are you able to give us the results?
Sure. So for the first question, about 23% said it was extremely influential, and 48% said very influential, then 25% for moderately, and then 4% for slightly. And then no one selected not at all.
Okay, great. So the majority still think media has some influence. Good. And the second one, please.
Yeah, so question 2 are a little more spread apart. So for 16% said much more for traditional media, 18% said somewhat, 34% said about equal for both, 18% said somewhat for more social media, and then 14% for much more from social media.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's quite a significant portion gets their news from social media. That's interesting. Be interesting to know the age of the different people, but we didn't break that down. Question 3, which do you trust more for accurate information?
So 70% said traditional media, 16% said both equally, 5% said social media, and then 9% said neither.
Okay, great. All right. Well, on that note, Skulk, looking at traditional media still has a lot of trust. I'm going to hand over to you for the next. Oh.
There we go. So why news is still important? I think that last poll showed that people still trust news and go to news sites even to verify the information that they get on social media. So I think that's quite an interesting and an important finding that we had on our very scientific poll just now as well. I think it's important to in a speaking from a communications point of view, in science institutions, I think it's important to just make the point that news is definitely not the be all and end all from a communications point of view anymore. But it is still important. The way we treat news in our institution is that we see it as one of our audiences, one of the ways to reach our audiences. Still important, but not the be all and end all. There's a comment from Eddie, and I'll go to that now. The reason it's still important, it is actually still applying journalistic principles like fact checking and like reporting objectively. That is in a very perfect world. So newsrooms are shrinking at the moment. People are becoming very, very junior. So they've got less and less resources to apply these principles, but they should. And that is actually why we still trust news and go to news sites. Eddie says, I found that much of the news is very biased. One has to do research on who wrote it and who the employees are in them. Absolutely. And that will bring me to a next discussion. Thank you, Eddie, for that comment. But the point is that traditional media is still a main source of news, and especially in rural areas where people don't necessarily have connectivity, they don't have social media access. So the only access that they have is radio and maybe still a printed newspaper that comes into that area. So that's another real reason that news is still important. And by the way, the trust that people still have in news is actually, there's research on it. So it's not just a thumbsuck, it is actually scientifically researched. And then another reason is to reach people outside your social networks. At Wits University, we have a Facebook account of over 400,000 people. We've got LinkedIn, also over 200,000 people. But it is only people that follows us. So to reach the person in KZN that we need to share our incredible research with, how do we reach them? So news is absolutely important for that, to get to them as well. Gillian?
There's a question from Beth. Beth, are you asking how, as a writer, you can make your writing more compelling and get more readers? Is that what you're asking?
No, sorry. My general thing is like, how do people like consuming things? Like, what is the most consumed media, so that we can tap into that as general science communicators, even if we like pure writers?
Yeah, I mean, from the research I've seen, it does seem that video is definitely what people are consuming. YouTube, I would say, yeah, videos and YouTube is definitely appears to be preferred media. Skulk, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Video is skyrocketing in terms of consumption, and this also goes with a point that I was going to make later. When you compile a campaign and when you work on a campaign, it is up to 6 times more likely that your story will be used in news if it's accompanied by a multimedia piece than just just by a written piece. So video is definitely, podcasts are up there as well. But the news release is not dead. It is, people will debate with me. I don't think it's dead. I think it's still got value. Yeah, but there's various platforms, Beth. There's when you compile a campaign, think first of who your audiences are, and then think of what platforms can I use and what types of media can I use to specifically reach that audience. If you, for instance, want to reach younger people, there's nothing better than TikTok at the moment. But things also change. This might not be the same in 5 years' time. I mean, Twitter was the thing, up to 5 years ago. Now, I'm not sure we should even have an account there. But anyway, so let's go to this question that we've got on the screen. News is something that someone doesn't want you to write about. Everything else is PR. Let's get some thumbs up or thumbs down on what we think about that statement. Do you agree with it or not? Thumbs up if you agree, thumbs down if you don't. There's a couple of thumbs up. Another.
It seems like people are agreeing with you, Phil.
Everybody agrees with it. So that statement is the point of view of a journalist. No journalist, not a single one that I've met in my career as a journalist, wants to be seen as pushing someone's PR. Not a single one. And that's the challenge that we as communicators have to overcome in telling our stories to journalists. Journalists are under extreme pressure. They have to write 3, 4, 5 stories a day. They don't have resources to come out to your news event anymore. In one instance, we actually had to go and pick up a journalist and transport them to the event that we had. And they're becoming very, very junior. They don't have the institutional, and it's not their fault. They don't have the institutional knowledge to look at a science or a financial or a environmental story and say, oh, there's the story. So we need to tell them what the story is. It's our job as science communicators to find that story and tell them what the story is. And what do they want? That's it. They want compelling stories. If you invite a journalist to come and speak to your vice chancellor or CEO just over a cup of coffee, that's a waste of time for them. If there's no story in that engagement, you are wasting their time. So always think of, come and chat to our vice chancellor. He's got a story to tell about X, Y, and Z. And that is what we need to get to them. Gillian, we can go to the next one.
Okay, just quickly, sorry, apparently there's no thumbs down allowed on Zoom. It's a very positive platform.
Oh.
Which is why we only got thumbs up, but there were, I think, a few people who would have maybe disagreed.
Okay. So the point there, the point there, most of what, in telling our science communication stories, it is probably mostly PR, but we need to take that PR piece and make it worthwhile for the journalist to be interested in. And that is turning it into a news story. News isn't news until someone produces it. And that's our job, to make the journalist realize this is news. Okay. So just quickly to go through, we don't have a lot of time, so just to quickly to go through the media landscape as it is. And this applies all over the place. It applies to South Africa, it applies to Kenya, it applies to the US. The media landscape is actually very simple. And in South Africa, apologies to our international colleagues, I'm going to speak about South Africa, but it applies to you guys as well. In South Africa, there's 4 main news houses that owns 90% of the titles, whether it's radio, TV, or newspapers or digital media. And each of them of the titles would cover a different either a sector of the community or a different sector of either business or sports or politics. And that's where Eddie's comment come in. I found that much of the news is very biased. One has to do research on who wrote it and who employs it. That is absolutely true. And that is why it's also important to read as varied as possible and not just go to your social media thing that pushes you news that you only want to read. You need to read as widely as possible. And know absolutely who writes what and what do they focus on. Some media is very most media have a political agenda, and you've quickly pick that up into what they want to push. So I'm not going to name names and titles and so on, but be very aware of that. And you can also pick up on who covers what. So when you do send news to media, you need to know the structure of the media industry in your country. Know which titles cover what stories. Know when they cover stories. The newsrooms have a very definite cycle on how they run. So if you send or try to contact a news editor or a journalist at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in a daily newspaper, you're wasting your time because that's on their deadlines. When you want to invite a journalist to your function on a Friday, you are wasting your time. There's nobody in a newsroom on a Friday. So be cognizant of what they cover in the first instance, when they would cover it, and then how they would cover it. And then if you and then also just consider their political biases if you need to. And then also the point that I made earlier, there's various ways of getting your news into a newsroom. It is not just a media release. So you can send them a feature article. You can send them an opinion or an op-ed piece that you write yourself and send them to publish it. Pictures and graphics and multimedia are extremely important. As I said before, you're 6 times more likely to get your piece published if you have those parts going along with it than if you don't. So that's just a sort of a snapshot on the media landscape. But the most important thing is you need to be aware of the structures and the way the media work to be able to successfully pitch your story. Okay, and then so how do we use this information that we talked about, the news media, in planning your campaign? If you've got a sports story in South Africa, if you've got a rugby story, then you go straight to Beeld newspaper, which doesn't exist anymore. But straight to the Afrikaans newspapers. So you can specifically choose your audience by knowing which newspaper covers what type of news, and then which type of media you want to use it. Some titles specialize in certain type of news: business day, business, politics, sport, lifestyle. So you can choose what type of story you want to tell and target that specific media to get it. Syndication, this is about like the five media houses in South Africa owns various titles, so they are syndicated. So you don't need to invite 200 journalists to your event. You can just specifically target newspapers or broadcast that is syndicated, that's going to spread that news around their whole company. So you can be very, very strategic in how you use this information to spread your news.
So we have a question from Patricia, which I think is worth answering. She says, could you comment on whether it's effective to take journalists to the field to experience the research going on and come up with a story from these trips? And I would say that absolutely is a great thing to do. I know Skulk's done it many times for Wits. Taking journalists out to see the story, to see it firsthand is a great way to get them interested. They will find the stories in that as well. So absolutely can recommend that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can get a journalist on site, that is number one. That is a perfect way to get your stories out. We often do this even before our big media event. So we would embargo a media event, say on the Thursday, but we would take media out there on the Tuesday and the Wednesday, so that they can have their stories ready when we lift the embargo. But that is absolutely important, and that's important not just for getting your story out. It's important for building media relations with yourself and media relations with your experts. So it's a brilliant way, and those media relations is it's crucial, and that is one of the most fun parts of my job, is to still go back and still see the dudes that I've been working with 10 years ago, and have a good catch up, have a good chat, and you get a great story, and it benefits everybody else. Okay.
And there's another question from Beth. Can't we use our own publishing sites, such as Wits News, as the credible source? With the decrease in media publications, can't we build our own sites up? I think yes. I think this is happening. I do think it's happening, but I still think if someone is looking for news, then they're not as likely to go and look at Wits News as they are to go and look at News 24, for example. So I don't think we're there yet, but I do think people's own channels and sites are becoming more and more important. But you just at the moment don't have the reach of media.
Yeah, I also think it's more than, yes, we can and we should. And it is important to everything should go to your own digital site. That's important. But the point that we were making earlier as well, that people verify news through the news. I think that's very important. It's like me, like I'm saying I'm the best science communicator in South Africa. Okay, yes, you say that, but where's the proof in it? if Beth says Skulk is the best science communicator in South Africa, now there's actually a bit of credibility in that. So it goes back to the trust and the credibility. You're not beating your own drum. So it is actually important to get someone else to sort of just that third party verification is highly important as well.
Okay, it's now your turn, those of you on the call. We're going to share a link to an academic article. Skulk, will you share that in the question and answer section?
I will.
We'd like you to just go and have a look at this academic article. It's from The Lancet. And we're going to give you 10 minutes to come up with your introduction, your so what to this story, which you can also type in the Q&A or in the chat. But please, as you're going about it, please feel free to ask questions. Remember storytelling, using those storytelling elements. But if you can all just come up, don't need to come up with the whole article, but just come up with your introduction, your so what, how you would tell the story, what you think is the most compelling part of the story, how you would tell it. Remember again, plain, everyday, accessible language. Remember just some of the tips that we've given you, and let's see how you do this. The link to the article is in the chat.
It's in the chat.
Okay. But please ask any questions if you have any, and then we'll give you a few minutes and then we'll discuss it. Oh, they're saying the chat is disabled. Do we know how to enable that chat?
I just tried resending it, so hopefully you guys can access that. But
Okay.
please let us know.
Will you let us know if you can access it now, please? There's thumbs up, so I'm hoping that's a good sign. More thumbs up. We know there's no thumbs down, so we've learned that. But yeah, okay, cool. Looks like you guys can get to it. Thanks. I know we are running short of time. If anyone would like to, you can share it on the chat, or you can share it in the Q&A. Or if any of you would like to talk through what you think is the most compelling thing, your so what from the story. Marianne, would you like to go?
Unmute. Okay. My thinking was, what I would kind of have as a title is, it's highly likely that the extent to which food is processed, or I wasn't sure whether to use refined, would need to look for a good, easy word for that, heightens the risk of getting type 2 diabetes, which is a debilitating disease that can cause, and there's things like blindness and what. I'd have to do a bit more research on that, but that's my take on it.
Okay, I think that captures it. Yeah. Anyone else want to have a go? This is a safe space for you to share, no judgment. So if anyone else would like to say what they think is the most compelling part of this research paper. Teresa? Teresa, I don't know if you're answering, if you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Haven't used Zoom for a while. To me, it looks like one could say that it's better to eat ice cream than a frozen TV dinner, because they basically said that a particular group of processed foods are much less likely to land you with diabetes 2 than another group of processed foods.
Okay, that's one way of capturing it. Beth, I see you say we don't have the levels of processed foods, but it still seems pretty boring when I think of what I find interesting. Okay. So some of the news headlines that I pulled out actually just was new evidence connects ultra-processed foods to rising diabetes rates. Hang on, there's more coming through. My title for the article, Eating Whole Foods Could Lower Type 2 Diabetes Mellitus. Okay, I think that's good. The rate of food processing globally is on the rise and has implications for type 2 diabetes. The so what sorts of the food base, animals versus plants. Okay. Beth, maybe it's all bad, but some of it's better than others. Some of it's maybe less bad than others. Okay. I think the main point we wanted to get across here is, I mean, this was a long, technical, detailed article. It was, I mean, if you just looked at the first page and I don't know, all the references and even if you went to the summary and the findings, it was still all written in Greek. It was very complicated. So really what we spoke about earlier, the clue here is to go straight to the conclusion. I think the conclusion is your best bet. That's where you're going to find the news. And in the conclusion, it talks about the study revealing the associations between different degrees of food processing and type 2 diabetes. So that was the main point we wanted to get across. And then also, I think most of you who've answered, you have just used very accessible language, because even, I think you could even just say type 2 diabetes. You don't have to say type 2 diabetes mellitus. I think you don't need, you can get away with that. Okay, so Enoch is going, type 2 diabetes is a disorder characterized by high glucose levels in blood. Many factors increase the risk of acquiring the disease, notably the type of food eaten and how much food is prepared increase the risk. So, Enoch, I would say the type of food eaten and how food is prepared, that might be your news most interesting part. No, hang on, maybe the next part. It was discovered that ultra-processed foods increase the risk. I think that is your news, and that would be your first sentence. And then you've started off by explaining what type 2 diabetes is. I think the news is that ultra-processed food could increase the risk of type 2 diabetes, and you explain what type 2 diabetes is a little bit lower down in your story, is my recommendation. So what? Cook it yourself to lower your risk of type 2 diabetes. Good advice. I don't know if that's what's in the paper. I think they're just saying avoid ultra high processed food. Okay, but I think we're gonna have to wrap it up. I know we did give you say we'd take 90 minutes, and we have gone a little bit past that. Anyone have any questions? There's an opportunity to ask questions before we go.
And before we go, can I just make 2 points, Gillian?
Yes.
So I think there was a couple of great ideas for intros or for headlines. The eating whole foods I liked. The better ice cream, better ice cream than TV dinner. I think that's maybe a Lee Berger idea. Not bad, but more a social media idea. Enoch, I think you wrote a story rather than an intro. So I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just highlighting a couple of things and then Marion, words like extent, I think we can leave out. You can just say processed food, eating processed food might lead to type 2 diabetes. The point that I do want to make is to keep it simple. Whatever you write, keep it simple. Keep one concept in your especially in an intro. One concept in an intro, one concept in a story. Whatever doesn't fit into that story, leave it out. And you can be brutal about that. So focus your stories. Rather write a second story if it's more complex. But keep one concept, especially in an intro. Make it simple to read and just go with that. That's my first point that I wanted to make. And then the second question point that I wanted to make is that science papers are often ununderstandable. You've got no idea what's going on. Even this one, you actually have to have a bit of knowledge about health science and nutrition to understand even the conclusion. And the point that I wanted to make is, if you don't understand it, ask the scientist. What does it mean? Don't be afraid to ask the question, because that is often going to be your news angle. Or the answer that they give you is often going to be the news angle. If you don't understand what you're writing, you are not going to write it clearly. So don't be afraid to ask the question. We used to have a big banner in our newsroom saying ATFQ. And because you are all civilized people, I won't say what the F in that in that word was, but it was ask the freaking question. So the question that you are not asking is the question that everybody else wants to know. So don't be afraid to ask the question. That's going to lead you most probably to your angle. So just those points that I wanted to make.
Thank you, Skulk. Anybody have any questions, not just about this paper, but just about the workshop in general, about EurekAlert? Please feel free to ask any of your questions now. While I'm waiting for you to ask your questions. This is the first webinar that's being brought to you by EurekAlert. We are going to do follow-up webinars. In 90 minutes, you can really only touch on things. So we do want to go more in depth into various issues. We will be also having a workshop for scientists themselves, and we'd encourage you to send your scientists on that workshop so they can also understand how there's power in communication. And then the more advanced workshops, we will go into more detail on a lot of, on sort of running a campaign. Also just how you take complex ideas and turn them into accessible stories, how you write with numbers. On that, how you write with numbers, we will also be sharing a resource with you, which will give you some pointers on writing with numbers and writing about complex issues. And it will also have some of the stuff we covered today will be in that resource. And we'll also be sharing a survey with you where we'll just ask you for your feedback. And if there is anything else that you'd like us to cover more in depth next time, please let us know. But then let me see the chats. Okay. Ashley's also just put a reminder that they're offering participants from today's webinar 5 free submission credits to use on EurekAlert. So you can use EurekAlert to distribute your news release. It goes to a massive database. Ashley would have to just clarify. So please take advantage of that. Ashley's email is in the chat. So please use that. But any questions, anyone? Okay, Simon's got a question. As a public engagement officer for a research organization, there is still a challenge for some scientists appreciating research dissemination in the media and community level. How best would I bring on board scientists that are still scared of the media? Skulk, can you help answer that?
That is a massive challenge, and because most scientists do see themselves as, I'm a scientist, I don't speak to the media, I publish my work in journals, I don't need to speak to the media. That's a massive challenge. And you're not going to win them all over. But one of the ways to win them all over is show them how the people that you do work with is successful, and they're not looking stupid, and they can build funding from it, they can build their own audiences from it, and so show them your success and show them what you can do for them. That's one way of doing that. The other reason is the other thing that Gillian touched on earlier is their science is actually public information. Their salaries are paid by the public. So they actually do have an obligation to share that with the public. The days of scientists just publishing in journals are over. It cannot happen anymore. The information is public. It is in many cases, well, it should be important, and it should be important for the public to know that. So, and then the other thing that I've seen is the more successful the scientist, the better they understand what you do, and the easier they are to work with. The people that we work on a regular basis know what we do. They appreciate what you do, and they often come to us and say, "Oh, we've got a paper coming up, and this is what we want to do." The people that are it's usually the middle senior people. They are very, very, very careful of how they phrase things, how they come across in the media, they usually don't want to speak about science. And those are the dudes that takes a bit of work in winning across. But then when they do come across, they do brilliantly. And then the younger generations of scientists, they are all over social media and so on, and they love science communications. They're usually not. It's almost a problem to sort of rein them in and to say, don't say X, Y, and Z, rather than having the problem to convince them to speak. So yeah, so not everybody's going to want to get their stuff in the media, but those who do, they are highly successful. Their ratings go up, their reputations go up, and it is highly valuable to them.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, then I think we're going to wrap it up. So, oh, hang on, sorry, Anne.
Yeah, because I'm also a communications person in a research institute of the AC. I thought I could highlight just a few ways. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're breaking up a bit. Can you just start again, please?
No, I wanted to add some additional practical tips to, I'm not sure who asked the question, because it's one of the challenges that I faced. And two of the ways that we encourage our researchers to speak to the media is, one, we organize informal meet and greets with the media. So it allows them to talk about their work, but in a way that there's no expectations. No one expects a story, no nothing. And you find that once you have this event, whether it's annually or biannually, they become familiar with each other. So even when a story pops out and the person is called for an interview, they don't feel like this person is out here to quote me in the wrong way or to do this and that. Prepare the researchers. So we've come up with, if, for example, a researcher is working on a particular project, then we prepare some sort of media notes. If they're asked, if you're celebrating, for example, World Safe Abortion Day, and this researcher is working on abortion, then there are those key points they should pick up from their research and communicate that. So we get them to understand their research from a newsworthy point of view. And you find that most of them, when they become confident with that kind of content or point, then they're not too afraid to speak to the media. That's about it. Thank you.
I think those are both great points. Absolutely. I think having those sessions where your researchers and the media can just get to know each other informally is a really fantastic idea. And yeah, definitely encourage that. And I think, as you said, the speaking notes, or that's actually a very good idea too. And I like the point you make that it makes your researchers more comfortable knowing, because I think often they're worried about how the media might capture their research and get it wrong. So I think that is a good point. Skulk, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, I think those are all very good and valid points. So thank you for that.
Patricia's also got a point. What has worked for me is to pull the science for good angle, how their science will be impactful globally. Okay, so this is answering Simon's question about how do you get scientists along, to agree to communicate. Yeah, that science is for the good angle, how their science will be impactful globally. Encourage the scientists who are interested in sharing their science through their personal social media platforms. Yes, I think that's also a very good point, is that they should share it through their own social media platforms. Some of them go, well, they don't want it to be about them, but actually it is about the people behind it as well. That's part of the story. And it's more powerful often coming from the scientists themselves. Okay, any final questions before we wrap up? No, okay. You can, here's our email addresses. You can always email. Oh, hang on, is there one more? Okay, let's just have a look. We need to make science communication accessible in different South African languages. Are there cases where this has been done well? Not that I know
Yes.
of, but Skulk, yeah.
Actually, sorry, Gillian, didn't mean to speak over you. There's an organization called Cybri, and Lebogang, that is absolutely crucial. You are spot on with that. There's an organization called Cybri, and they have I don't know the name of the person at the moment, but I can get it to you. They are actually doing a science dictionary in isiZulu at the moment, and coming up with scientific terms for Zulu, and that needs to happen in all of our languages. I agree with you absolutely there. So yeah, that's maybe something that can be looked at in the future, and that might even be a brilliant science communication PhD even. So absolutely. Sibusiso Biela. There you go. Okay, anything else? The last point that I want to make before Gillian closes this webinar is that as a science communicator, wherever you are, I think the job is extremely privileged, and it is an invitation to be fascinated. I often go to speak to an expert in whatever, whether it's geology or physics or whatever, for a 15-minute interview, and I walk out there 3 hours later being fascinated by what they do. And that is what, as my last point, what I invite you all to do, wherever you are, go and spend the time to go and speak to your experts and be fascinated by what they do. They are often world leaders in what they do. So go and speak them and make use of their time and go and tell their stories. That is what make our lives brilliant. That's what makes my job the best job in the world. So I absolutely invite you to go and be fascinated by what you do.
And we have a question, Simtandile. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. Are you on? Sorry, we can't hear you. Simtandile, we can't hear you.
Hi, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better.
Oh, sorry. No, I think you've already covered with my question actually, so it's okay. Thank you.
Oh, okay. If you do have any follow-ups, any other questions, there's our email addresses. Please be in touch. But just to wrap up, really a big thank you to EurekAlert for sponsoring this workshop and for venturing into Africa. EurekAlert really keen to hear African research stories, so please make use of that. We will be holding more workshops in future, so please look out for them. Look out for the resource we're going to share, and please fill in the survey and give us feedback. Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you attending today. Thank you.